Remote, beautiful, mysterious, unique. Islands are worlds of their own. Islands are also part of a global community that's changing, for better or worse. In the middle of the North Atlantic, at the edge of the Arctic Circle, lies an island nation on the knife edge of the world. Iceland is one of the most volatile places on Earth. Made by volcanoes, spewing out molten rock over millions of years. The Earth is still active. Instead of escaping the wilderness, they're harnessing its power. For centuries, Iceland's physical isolation has shaped and protected its people. Iceland is one of the least populated countries on Earth, and one of the wildest. A geological hotspot. Iceland also straddles one of the world's most volatile geological features, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. It's a massive tectonic plate boundary, and it splits Iceland in half. As the tectonic plates pull Iceland apart, magma rises to fill the space. It's this volcanic activity that's forged Iceland's bedrock, and its construction is far from over. Today, the island boasts more than 100 volcanoes and more extreme geothermal activity than any country on Earth. Isolated from the outside world, Iceland's volatility usually goes unnoticed, until nature chooses to remind everyone of its awesome power. In April 2010, Iceland's Eyjafjallajökull volcano erupted, bringing Europe to a standstill.
The eruption that took place here wasn't big, but it was serious, because it produced so much ash.
Haraldur Sigurdsson is a world expert in volcanology, living in one of the most volcanically active regions on Earth.
Iceland has been inhabited for more than 1,100 years. People have lived with eruptions and felt their effects. In Iceland, it's so common, people regard it as an everyday thing.
Even by Icelandic standards, this eruption was extraordinary.
The ash creates new soil, like this layer here. It was because the ash was so fine that it spread out so far across the Atlantic. Due to the combination of steam, explosions in the glacier, and gas in the magma, the ash was much finer. That's why this eruption created so many problems.
But the effects of this eruption pale in comparison to a cataclysmic explosion that happened here some 200 years ago. These are lava fields at Eltrian. The moss-covered lumps are scars left by the flow of molten rock. The lava spewed from Lakagiga, a tectonic fissure that erupted in 1783, creating one of the biggest volcanic events in history. For 8 months, deadly ash and lava engulfed the island. killing a fifth of its population. The ash cloud spread far, plunging the world into darkness and famine. All movements within the island's volcanoes are monitored. At the first sign of unusual activity, residents are contacted by phone and evacuated to a safe location. No one was killed during Iceland Documentory's recent eruptions. In the shadow of volcanoes, Icelanders have learned to survive. Though the country's interior is so barren, most Icelanders are forced to live on the edge, in coastal towns and cities. Reykjavik is home to nearly 40% of the population. Over 1,000 years ago, when the Viking settlers first landed on Iceland's shores, the forbidding landscape loomed large. Long, dark winters and poor quality soil made it impossible to farm the land. But nourished by the warm Gulf Stream, the fertile waters surrounding Iceland offered a lifeline. The early islanders came to depend on fish to sustain them. They still do. Today, less than 1% of the entire island is cultivated for crops. Fishing is still a major source of income and a way of life. Turbulent weather systems collide off the island's coast, causing vicious storms and dangerous swells. Over centuries, Icelandic sailors have learned to respect the ocean's power and to ask God's help to sail it with a prayer. Iceland's coastline is peppered with churches. Their altars are the last place a sailor would visit before going to sea, and the first place he would visit on his return.
The sea gives and the sea takes away, as we say in Iceland.
Christian joined the fishing industry at a time when cod was king. In 1991, over 1 million metric tons of fish were caught in Iceland's waters. Reykjavik evolved from rustic town to vibrant export capital. But the world that was buying Iceland's fish was changing. Centuries of living in an ever-shifting wilderness made them resilient. 1,000 years of isolation shaped the national character. With no neighbors to call on, Icelanders learned to be self-sufficient. With nowhere to run, they learned to endure. Iceland's wilderness is changing on a scale the islanders have never seen before, and in ways that are almost impossible to predict. In a land of snow and ice, the effects of global warming are easy to see. The glaciers that cover 11% of Iceland's landmass are melting. Vatnajökull is Europe's largest ice cap. 800 meters deep, it covers more than 8,000 square kilometers. But it's shrinking at an alarming rate. 100 years ago, there was no lagoon here, just a sheet of ice 30 meters deep. But as Vatnajökull and his outlet glaciers shrink, this lake is filling up, fast. A century ago, the glacial tongue reached out to sea. Now, it's retreated by 2 kilometers. The lagoon left by the shrinking ice has an unearthly beauty. But the beauty hides a destructive force. As it extends seawards, this lagoon is threatening to wash away Iceland's main coastal highway. It's a story that's being repeated all over the island. Meltwater and glacial debris are reshaping the landscape. Experts predict that in just a few hundred years, Iceland may have lost all its glaciers. Their retreat will leave behind a very different landscape and climate. What used to fall as snow will fall as rain. The barren earth will become more arable. And sediment washed down from the mountains will transform the coastal ecosystem. As the world warms, Iceland's isolation is melting away. Icelanders are preparing for a very different future, in which the demands of the outside world are a driving force. Many believe it's natural energy that will propel Iceland forward. The landscape is alive with it. It cuts across the earth. It seeps from the ground. Icelanders are world leaders in harnessing its potential. Almost all homes are heated by geothermal energy. But it's glacial rivers that are powering commercial growth. Fast and furious, their potential to generate hydroelectricity is massive, and industrial prospectors are queuing up to harness it. In 2003, aluminium manufacturer Alcoa chose the remote coastal town of Reyðarfjörður as a location for a massive smelting factory. This is one of the biggest industrial developments in Iceland's history. Temperatures of 950 degrees Celsius, liquid aluminium is smelted using high-intensity electrical currents. This process requires huge amounts of energy, and it's hydropower that supplies it, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's tough manual work, but women make up almost a quarter of Fjarðaál's total employees. The factory draws its entire 2,000-strong workforce from the local area. It's shift work, the hours are long, but people aren't complaining. Producing 940 metric tons of aluminium a day, it also generates huge revenue for the national economy. Iceland has no natural deposits of aluminium ore. The raw material has to be transported thousands of miles to the factory. Electricity here is so cheap, it more than makes up for the expense of shipping. But there is a cost. And it's Iceland's wilderness that's paying the price. Some 50 kilometers east of the smelting plant lies a subterranean powerhouse. 75 kilometers of tunnels direct tons of water per second through gigantic turbines. 2 glacial rivers have been dammed and channeled to flow through this energy labyrinth. And the hydropower they create all goes to power the smelters. It's a massive engineering operation. And above ground, the scars run deep. This is Kauranuka Dam. Water that powers the aluminium smelter pools here in a reservoir 25 kilometers long. At nearly 200 meters high, the dam wall is the biggest of its kind in Europe, and one of the most controversial. The proposal to build the billion-dollar project triggered national outrage. Icelanders were appalled that one of Europe's largest unspoiled wildernesses was to be drowned in the name of industry. Protesters camped out at the construction site. They rallied huge international support. But they couldn't stop the march of progress. The dam and the aluminium factory are now a concrete reality, transforming the landscape and transforming lives. Factory work has thrown the community a lifeline, but not all the change is good. Antisocial working hours are having an unexpected impact on domestic life. Shift workers like Hansina are finding it difficult to keep up with friends and family.
Those of us who work for Alcoa are sort of lost. We leave here at 7 in the morning and get back 9 o'clock at night. People don't dare phone or visit because they think we're either working or asleep.
To make sure they stay in touch, Hansina gives out copies of her work timetable to friends.
With the collapse of the banks, if it hadn't been for the aluminium plant, we would probably have gone bankrupt. Now the future is bright.
Today, Iceland is attempting a historic balancing act between people and nature, ecology and economy. Building this aluminium factory has set an important precedent for progress. And there's a good argument for building even more smelters as global warming takes effect. Fed by fast melting glaciers, rivers will see surges in water flow. And their hydropower potential will dramatically increase. It's a great window of opportunity, but it's brief. Experts predict the surge will last 50 years or so, after which it'll fade to almost nothing as the glaciers that feed the rivers dry up. Many believe industrialization isn't Iceland's only option. This is one of the world's most pristine environments. One of the most sparsely populated countries on Earth. Parts of the island are so off the beaten track, they've yet to be named. But the forbidding terrain that's kept humans at bay for so long is now drawing them in. Today, visitors come to be amazed at Iceland's extreme beauty and the creatures that inhabit it. On the northeast coast of Iceland, Húsavík is a town that's used to travelers. It was one of the first places settled by seafaring Vikings. For centuries, people here scraped a living from fishing. Long winters brought hard times, so the bigger the catch, the better. Ecotourism is one of the fastest growing industries in Iceland. But the money-making season is short. With hardly any daily sunlight, tourists stay away in winter, and places like Húsavík become ghost towns. To make ends meet, many locals are leaving for the city, where job prospects are better. It's a pattern being repeated all over the island. The population of Reykjavik has more than doubled in the last 50 years. If this exodus continues, towns like Húsavík will simply fall off the map. The debate about Húsavík's future sums up the crossroads Iceland is at. Icelanders must choose between an old and new way of life. It's the old ways that have seen them survive in one of the most volatile environments on Earth. But though remote, Iceland is no longer alone. Technology has brought the global community ever closer. And Icelanders are learning to communicate with it in their own distinct voice.
In a language learned when no one's listening, try my best to tell you how I feel. Somehow I'm sure, and this I believe in, this is real. From my heart I sing to you and
Dicta are an indie rock band in a thriving music scene. With a best-selling album and several Icelandic #1s to their name, Dicta are the sound of young Icelandic culture. Contemporary, confident, in tune with the world.
stop me from flying. I leave no footprints in your eyes.
Friends from childhood, Dicta got together in school. At the time, there were plenty of Icelandic artists making it big internationally. Many Icelanders are bilingual. English is the unofficial language of business here, but Icelandic has always been the language of the arts. Singing in English is a break with tradition and a response to a very new need to engage with the outside world.
Oh my God, I'm losing it. I'm finally going out of it. My senses tingle, I can hardly breathe. Oh my God, I'm losing it. I'm finally going out of it. I feel my
The media may be English, but the message speaks of Iceland.
Thank you. Thank you for the world, the world, the world. Thank you for the light, for making me see inside of me.
Dicta's confidence is typical of Icelanders' approach to an ever-changing world. Isolated for years, they've developed a strong sense of self and the confidence to adapt in the face of change. This small, versatile nation has already positioned itself as a global player. Its fortunes, good and bad, now affect us all. But if the last decades have seen Iceland transformed, there are bigger challenges to come. For over 1,000 years, Iceland's culture has been shaped by the volatile landscape. Now the islanders have the power to push back, to anticipate disaster, to bend nature to their will. But for how long? Once again, fishermen are the champions of Iceland's economy. But the seas aren't an endless resource. Industrialists are harnessing nature to create an alternative future. But even these reserves can dry up. As the world is warming, Iceland sits at a crossroads, searching for a sustainable path. Like never before, the world is watching. In so many ways, the fate of Europe's great wilderness matters to us all.